You're listening to episode 68 of The Secular Buddhist. Welcome to The Secular Buddhist. I'm Ted Meissner. The Secular Buddhist is the podcast and website for modern, secular application of early Buddhist thought. The podcast has interviews and roundtable discussions pertaining to engaged Buddhist training and practice, and the companion website has show notes for each episode, along with resource materials on Buddhism, critical thinking, science, secularism, and skeptical thought. Though the podcast focuses on core practice from a secular viewpoint, more traditional teachings are welcome and openly discussed. Stephen Schettini speaks with us about his new book, It Begins with Silence, The Art of Mindful Reflection. Meditation can be very challenging, not the least of which is understanding what it is we're trying to do. Empty the mind, use the mind, both, or neither. Seeing that meditation can be many things can help that particular part of our practice. It is inclusive of the attention of mindfulness and the reflection of what's happening in the discursive mind. And it helps for us to remember that it really is a component of an overall practice, that meditation is not all of what we do as part of the practice. It is certainly a part that gets a great deal of attention in our culture. But, as our returning guest today, Stephen Schettini, points out, meditation is a chaotic affair, and it helps if we make it a part of ourselves. That's only going to happen if we find the practice enjoyable and enriching in our lives. Stephen is the founder and director of Quiet Mind Seminars. He's led hundreds of meditation workshops in the Montreal area since 2003 through www.thequietmind.org and has contributed columns regularly to local newspapers and to The Suburban, Quebec's largest English-language weekly. He is also freelance to the Montreal Gazette. Stephen made a living in print communications and over the next 20 years authored, co-authored, illustrated, and designed dozens of books on information technology and health science. So, sit back, relax, and have a nice cherry blossom green tea. Hi, everyone. We are here with Stephen Schettini. Stephen, thank you for being here.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Ted. Nice to be here again.
It's nice to be speaking with you. Folks who have been listening to the podcast for a while will remember Stephen, who joined us in episode 43 to talk about his book, The Novice. Today we are joined by Stephen to speak about his new book, It Begins with Silence, The Art of Mindful Reflection. So, Stephen, I was very excited when I went to your website and found that the new book had come out. Tell us about that and what it's about.
Well, it's my take on the Buddha's teachings, and I teach regularly to a group of people, to varying groups of people who are not really interested in Buddhism with a capital B, although they do seem to be very interested in the what they've heard about Buddhism and the ideas that are expressed in it, and they feel that something valuable is in there. They have no desire to join an organization or to put on robes or to bow down to anybody, but they're fascinated. They're really interested. So after years of teaching these people, I finally agreed to put down on paper what this meant to me and to try and put it in their terms. And I've always been very careful in my teaching to stick quite, I hate to say the word, but religiously faithful to the structure of the way the Buddha taught, because quite frankly, I'm not sure I can improve on it. I don't think I can. It's terrific. At the same time, I've tried very much to use plain 21st century language at the same time. So the book is really the classical ideas and concepts of Buddhism expressed in plain English. Now, there are several aspects to it. First of all, I try not to talk too much about meditation because I think people get the idea that Buddhism is meditation. It's only one part of it. And I don't even really emphasize mindfulness that much because, again, there's more to it than mindfulness.
Right.
And so I came up with the term mindful reflection, and that stuck. I've been using it for several years now, and it seems to be a solid term which I can rely on. So mindful reflection encapsulates both the mindfulness, which is a matter of attention and an empiricism, if you like, and the reflection, which deals very much with the discursive thinking mind, because we do, in the practice of awakening, change the way we think. So it emphasizes these two sides to the process. And at the same time, the book is subtitled The Art of Mindful Reflection.
Tell us about the art part of it.
Well, for this stuff to work, in other words, for it to transform your mind, it has to become a part of you. And it has, among other things, it has to be enjoyable. Sometimes it's not. Mostly insight, true insight, is actually usually quite uncomfortable because the whole point of insight is to overcome illusion or delusion. And we tend to hold on to our illusions because they make us feel better. Letting go of them hurts. In the short term. In the long term, of course, it makes you better. But in the short term, it hurts. However, there's still an aspect to the practice which needs to be fun. It needs to be desirable. You need to want to go and sit down on your cushion. You need to want to probe those uncomfortable demons that plague you in the night and see where they came from and see really what that's got to do with your psyche. So there's an artistic quality to that, of being able to just sort of stand to one side, let it happen and watch it carefully while you're participating in it, and yet standing outside of it. It's not a scientific thing. It's not something that you can sum up in a few steps, even though the Buddhist manuals tend to be all about steps and lists. The actual practice is anything but that. Meditation is a haphazard, it's a chaotic affair. And it, to me, it resembles the creative process of art. And so I called it The Art of Mindful Reflection, and I tried to write it. It's written in a very artistic style. It's not an instruction book, it's an example book.
Now, you had said earlier that one of the points you had just made is that it's not just meditation, that there's more to it than that. And to me, when I hear that, this is something that you and I have chatted about before, and we are very much in agreement that we see in our contemporary culture a lot of mindfulness, and there's this one aspect, and it's not even just one meditation. It's only one kind of meditation, let alone other varieties, and what we mean by the whole of the practice. So in the book, how do you help, because you're not so much writing this for people who would consider themselves Buddhists with a capital B. How do you describe the rest of that practice that's not the meditative component to them?
Well, I don't so much describe it as like I say, I make an example of it, and I think what I do with the nicest possible motives and in the most benevolent possible way is I confuse people. I'm trying to confuse people into the reality that you can't just take some technique or some method and expect it to transform your life. That's just superstition.
Mm-hmm. That's magical thinking. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. If you want to transform your whole life, you have to engage with your whole life. And so this book basically, which in some ways, I mean, I can understand it seeming like a ramble through a whole bunch of different concepts and theories. But if you look in the back of the book, you'll see the structure which I use. I've laid it out. I've drawn it entirely from the Pali Canon. And it's quite straightforward, and it follows very much the Buddha's method. And yet I've tried to show how it encapsulates an enormous variety of thinking and experiencing life, everyday life. So I divided it up. It's an artsy sort of book. It's a bit of a coffee table book, because it's got 10 chapters, and each chapter has 3 parts. There's a little story to introduce it, and then there's a few lines of verse. Actually, there's 5 stanzas of verse, which introduces each chapter. And then there's a commentary on that in the old-fashioned style, in the old Sanskrit style. I take a very dense few words and then elaborate it. So there's this mixture of the old and the new, which I've used to try and sort of establish the credentials of what I'm talking about. This is not my stuff. I didn't create this. This is very much the Buddha's stuff. But I'm presenting it in the way that it's come to have meaning for me, which is not to say that's the only way to interpret it, but this is the example that I can be a witness to. And this is what people in my seminars and my workshops find interesting, and that's why they come.
And that's a good segue to the Quiet Mind seminars. Tell us about that. There's a website that's set up, www.thequietmind.org. People can find information there, but tell us about the seminars.
The seminars I do in batches usually of 8. There are 8 evenings, 8 weekday evenings, one a week. So it typically runs for about 8 weeks. I've done 10-week courses and 6-week courses as well. And in them we address a specific issue. For example, the one we're working on now is about dealing with anxiety and fear. And we sit. I encourage people to be comfortable. Most people sit on the floor, meditation style. Some people sit on chairs. That's really not the main point. But we do a little bit of mindfulness, of breath awareness, and then we extend the mindfulness also to the feelings and the thoughts and to phenomena. And I do mention Buddha from time to time, and I'll tell a story from the Buddha's life occasionally. I'll tell stories from my own experience, sometimes from the past when I was a monk, sometimes from today when I'm dealing with a troublesome neighbor I happen to have, and talking about how what I've learned and what I practice impacts the way in which I handle conflict or anxiety or whatever it is that I'm talking about. And then we take questions, and there's sometimes quite a lot of discussion, and it brings up issues. It tends to be rather intimate. And it's incredibly satisfying, and it's very enriching for me. If I'm enriched by it, then I feel comfortable that they're getting something out of it too, and that's certainly the feedback I get.
Yeah. And I can see that it sounds like what you're describing is that you focus a great deal on what the experience is and what people are seeing happening in their minds. Do you find that people who come to the seminars may not have tried that kind of thing before, and it's a little startling for them to what's actually going on in their heads once they take a look?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that goes for everybody, whether they whether they jump into Buddhism at the deep end the way I did, or whether they just come in sort of sideways out of idle interest. Yeah, it's frightening when you close your eyes, when you're asked to watch your breath for 30 seconds and not be distracted. Like, sure, yeah, well, okay, when's the interesting stuff going to start? But then people get a shock. And I think you need a shock. I think you need a crisis in your life in order to take such a radical step of wanting to stop the stuff that's going on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And in fact, the penultimate chapter in my book is called Stopping. It's not called emptiness or shunyata, it's called stopping. And that's the sort of language that people seem to relate to. That's what they want.
Yeah.
They want, how can I stop my mind? And my answer to them, which disappoints them sometimes, is you can't. But you can learn to accept it. And so work with that. So, it's like any form of this sort of teaching. I mean, you have to deal with people's expectations and you have to give them something, but you have to be realistic, and you have to maintain both their interest and their sense that you have some integrity.
So I see on the website there are a couple of different
themes to the workshops. The one I think that's in right now is that the dealing with anxiety and fear.
That's right, yeah.
And the next one that's coming up is wielding your power, dealing with difficult people and situations, grabbing life by the horns. Tell us about that one.
Well, my wife Caroline is a personal life coach, and she encounters people in a one-on-one situation, whereas I tend to encounter people in groups. But nevertheless, we work very much in the same field, you know. We both encounter the sort of issues which drive people to this point of desperation where they seek something radical to change their own minds. And this is the sort of entry point which comes up. People, in this case, people suffering from fear. In the next case, people who feel that they're stronger than they are but don't know how to express it. You know, I think everyone would agree that we're going through a period of incredible self-doubt in the West. There's an epidemic of low self-esteem. I think I mentioned this, I seem to remember talking to you about this in my last interview, actually, that I've spoken to several Tibetans about this who are quite amazed. It's not something that they can relate to. They have to figure out what this is, this low self-esteem. It seems to be a Western phenomenon. And, but anyway, wherever it comes from, whether it's cultural or something deeper, it's a problem. And so we try to identify, because Caroline works very closely with me on setting up the seminars. She's actually the associate director of Quiet Mind. And we're looking constantly for entry points. This is the big thing in terms of advertising and getting people for each course. We're looking for an entry point that they'll relate to. Like, what will catch their eye when they see it in the newspaper or on the website that will make them think, oh, maybe that will help me. And then we take that and we run with it. And I talk about the stuff which has become the most meaningful stuff for me in my life, and that really, yeah, most of it comes from Buddhism.
You had posted in your blog recently about I think it was a lunch that you had with an old friend of yours who was a monk, that you were monks at the same time.
Yeah, George.
And yes, and that one of the things that was in that blog post is your friend had said how he didn't see that, you know, contentious, irascible monk that he was used to, that you seemed, and it was strange for him to think of it this way, you seemed happy.
And I seem happy now. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. And that this was you were a very different person. And of course, as people listening to the podcast, we're Buddhist inclined people. The idea of change, of impermanence, this is something that we're very familiar with conceptually. But we see this kind of growth over time. You experience that, and your friend recognized that in you personally, that you have changed. And what you're finding here and what you're teaching in the seminars is what has been very beneficial to you in mindful reflection. And I think there are many people who will resonate with that particular approach to this teaching and practice, that it's not just feel-good meditation and poof, your anxiety is gone, that there's much, much more to it than that. There's much more benefit to it than just, if I sit for 10 minutes, I'll be relaxed, and then everything is fine and I can take on more stress. No, there's transformation going on. There's transformation that's occurring.
Well, sure. I mean, if meditation is just to escape for a few minutes, then, you know, I mean, that's just one alternative among several. The others being TV, drugs, alcohol, sex. I don't want to be nasty about it, but really the point, if it doesn't have long-term benefits, then it's just another escape system.
Right.
And I think that completely undervalues the whole point of what the Buddha did, and it clearly contradicts what he said about his own teachings. But nevertheless, if you Google meditation, the word meditation, most of the stuff you'll come up with is get meditated now. Get now. Stop your thoughts in 5 minutes. And the reason that that's there is because that's what people want. What sells best is telling people exactly what they want. And it's unfortunate that people go for that. But that's why I say for people to take this path seriously, it takes a serious crisis. It takes a serious realization that something's wrong. Something is wrong. Life is not what I expected. It's not on my side. The universe is not benevolent. And that's exactly where the Buddha started with his first truth, isn't it?
Yeah, precisely where. And are you finding, Stephen, that people who are coming to the seminars, and I think you had mentioned this earlier, that they're having some sort of crisis. Have they tried typically other things? They're coming from some other practice or tradition or a way that they have of dealing with these crises that are going on that hasn't been working for them, and they're not quite sure what could work?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, otherwise they wouldn't still be looking, would they? We're always looking. I mean, on the whole, we're encouraged to look in very superficial places. Like the evening sitcom, or a nice job that will bring you lots of money, or, the pursuit of the perfect relationship, or any of those things. The point is that you have to become disillusioned with them one by one before you can move on to the next thing. And hopefully you stumble on a path which has long-term potential like this one. But there's no guarantee,
There isn't, and I think that's one of the challenges that we sometimes face is the expectation, because of our culture, buy it in a bottle, take a pill, everything will be fine, sit for 5 minutes, you're good.
Oh, I think it goes deeper than our culture. I think there's something biological in there.
Oh, there could be very well be that it's just presenting in our culture that there is a biological imperative for a quick fix.
Yeah.
That it's, and this is something, as we were talking before the interview started, that this is something that Buddha realized as well upon his realization. This is hard. People aren't going to gravitate to this. This is going against the stream, is the phrase that Noah Levine uses a great deal and is popularized with his book. It really is. It's not easy. It's something where it's like with losing weight. Really, diet and exercise are pretty good ways to do it, but it's not always easy to do. And it's the same here. Transforming how you respond, particularly in difficult situations, that's hard work. But it's well worth it, because the benefits that accrue over time are really, really quite amazing, and they can be viewed as perfectly natural things that we are practicing and getting better, as we would with any other kind of exercising of a particular skill or trait. We get better at it. And
it's not just hard work, it's also counterintuitive. Like, why should I meditate on my suffering? How is that going to make me feel better? I don't want to do that. Give me something else. Which you can understand. I think everyone can understand that. But it goes against the grain. I constantly tell my students this. We're swimming upstream. We're doing what everyone else says is the wrong thing.
Yeah. You're right. That's a very good point, that it isn't just hard work once you're in the stream going the wrong way. Just diving in, just understanding that this is something that you need to do, that initial hurdle, is the biggest one. I mean, once you've made that, at least you know where you're going and you're trying, and it is hard work. But You're right, it's more than that. It's even realizing that this is counterintuitive. That's not what one would think. If I want comfort, I should go for things that are comfortable.
Imagine that you're a PR specialist and you're advising Siddhartha Gautama, who's about to start his teaching career, on how to sell this. And he says, well, I thought I would start off with this truth that life is really disappointing and suffering, and it's full of unease. How about that? What would you tell him?
We might want to change that a little. We might want to look at another approach.
And I'm sure that occurred to the Buddha too. But he came back to it nonetheless, because he didn't see a choice.
Well, that's something I put up on the Facebook page for the podcast a few weeks ago. It's an unfortunate fact that this practice can lack a certain visceral appeal to newcomers when we start with the first noble truth.
Yeah. Which is why the northern traditions are so popular. They're much easier to go with. The Tibetan imagery and the Zen intellectualism, they're much more appealing to the Western mind at the outset than the Southern traditions. But the more time you spend with the complexities, especially the rituals of Tibetan Buddhism, which is where I came from, and most of my Buddhist friends are from, I find more and more people, myself included, turning increasingly to the Pali Canon and the simplicity of it. But yeah, it doesn't have an immediate appeal for sure.
Mm-hmm. And that's, it's funny you should mention that, because I also experienced that with many people who have started in those traditions and find that they are hungry for that simple and yet very deep and meaningful teaching that we find in the Pali Canon, which is why to me I love plunging in there, because I always find something and I learn something, even if it's a sutta I've gone through many times before. I always learn something new that's helpful right away, and I have an aha moment. Oh yeah, I didn't catch that before. And there's so much of it. It's not just the Majjhima Nikaya. It's much, much more than that, and it's fascinating reading throughout.
It's very powerful stuff, indeed.
Very, very.
Yeah.
So, we've talked about the Quiet Mind seminar that's coming up next, the workshop that's on the website. You also have a couple of free downloads, a few audio files.
That's right.
Here's the meaning of mindfulness, anger, forgiveness, love, facing your fears. So, people who are listening to the podcast, if you're interested in this, and I will, of course, be linking this on the episode page for this episode, go to www.thequietmind.org. The book we have been speaking about is It Begins with Silence, The Art of Mindful Reflection. Stephen, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Your listeners might be interested also in my personal website at Schettini.com. There's a whole lot of excerpts from The Novice, which is my memoir of my time with the Buddhists, with the Tibetans. And there are lots of stories on there. The website has recently been completely refurbished, and it leads off in all sorts of different directions.
It is. In fact, I have it open right now, and it's funny you should bring that up, because that was the central point I used as the launch for the other sites as well. Folks listening, that's www.schettini, SCHETTINI.com. You'll find links to other things, as well as, I also want to mention the blog too. Let's not forget about that. This is thenakedmonk.com. How often are you putting articles on that, Stephen?
I try and write something about once a week. Sometimes it's a little more, sometimes a little less, but it's certainly one of the most enjoyable things that I do, but it's also quite time consuming. So, yeah, I try to do that. But there's a good bunch of articles already up there, and they're not topical. They're not about current events, so you can read them anytime.
Mm-hmm. There is, in fact, one of my favorite articles you have on there is Dread of Silence from about mid-March. And it's, for folks who look at the website for the Secular Buddhists, The Naked Monk is one of the blogs that I do have linked on the right-hand side. So no matter what page you go to on the Secular Buddhist, this is linked there, and it is there for a very good reason, because the posts that Stephen puts up are they're not scholarship examinations of esoteric points of Dhamma, although that can be very interesting. These are blog posts that to me are very appealing as an emotional living human being. I can identify with the things that are in these. So thank you very much for putting those out, Stephen.
Oh, you're very welcome. I think of them as reports from the front. I mean, this is where Buddhism takes place, is in everyday life.
Yes, it's not just what's on the cushion. Certainly there's very important exercise we do there, very important work we do there on the cushion. But how this manifests is in our hearts and minds and our interactions with each other and what's going on outside, as you say, on the front.
Yeah.
Stephen, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much for having me, Ted. It's a pleasure.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the companion website at www.thesecularbuddhist.com, and you'll find an entire web page devoted to this and every episode. There are also links to discussions about today's topic on the Secular Buddhist Facebook fan page. The music for The Secular Buddhist is used by permission from John Kaizan Neptune's CD, Steps in Time. Additional music is provided courtesy of Monty Levinson of Taihei Shakuhachi and Rodrigo Rodriguez. Their websites are linked on The Secular Buddhist on the About Music page. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on The Secular Buddhist.